Hi there, welcome to No Nonsense Whisky. My name's PF and on today's episode we're going to be covering something a little different to normal. Over the last few weeks and months I've been covering some actually pretty nice bottles, if I dare say so myself. But today it's time to go back to my roots at least, and that's the cheap of the cheap of the cheap. Now there was a time back in the day on the channel where I set myself a bit of a 50 quid cap. Over the last few years I've seen the short-sightedness of that and the fact that whiskey is becoming more and more expensive, and the better whiskies, quote unquote better whiskies, are becoming more and more inaccessible for that sort of price point at least. Now don't get me wrong, there are plenty of whiskies under that 50 quid that are proper, bang for buck, that sort of thing. So, that cap can exist sort of today, but I thought for the channel I can't really sort of say categorically 50 quid is my cap, because there are some really incredible whiskies that are pushing over that price now. Now when I first started the channel I didn't have a whole heap of expendable cash for this sort of thing, so I was always looking for good bargains, I was always looking for supermarket whiskies, I was always looking for online deals, and that sort of fizzled out a little bit because I found myself having a bit of a kind of like, I sort of zone in, I sort of get a hold of the big bold flavours. So I'm looking for kind of high ABVs, I'm looking for peat, dare I say, bourbons, things like that. That's kind of my personal preference in whiskies these days. So that's sort of disappeared a little bit. I don't really look in the supermarkets anymore, or if I do, I sort of have a glance to see what's on deal, and I never really buy anything in the UK supermarkets anyway. I tend to be an online shopper now, and maybe Amazon if there's a good deal on. Which brings me kind of full circle to this little wee beastie here today, because this, as you might have already seen, the Tovess Islay. Now this, weirdly, is an Amazon special. So this is actually created by Amazon, owned by Amazon, and put out by Amazon. Now the thing that you need to know about this before we even get into it is that it sells for just under £13. Now obviously this is a UK thing, worldwide this isn't going to happen for everybody, but maybe where you are in the world Amazon is selling this as well, in which case fine. But for us this is a kind of just under £13 bottle of whiskey. Now I haven't seen a single malt, bear in mind, single malt Scotch whiskey, I haven't seen a single malt whiskey that sort of cheap for a while now. There were some Aldi bottlings that were being sold for about sort of £17, but 13 quid, I think that's probably why we've got this. My friend Alex gave me the rest of this bottle, he didn't like it, so he let me have a look into this one, and I've been sort of drinking through it and seeing what I think. But yeah, so they're the key bits of information. This is a super cheap bottle of whiskey, it's 40%. We don't know what distillery it came from, but we'll have a little look on the tasting as we go through it. But in my humble opinion, it's probably a Kalila. I can't see anyone else letting go of their spirit sort of this young. I imagine it's super young. I always joke with things like this. I imagine this isn't just like 3 years in a day or whatever. I imagine this is literally someone there with their watch, like looking for the exact point in time, the exact minute that this thing turns 3 years old, and they're tipping it and getting that barrel being used again. That's what when it's this cheap, that's what I imagine is happening, because, well, obviously these barrels have been round and round and round now. Obviously it's been chill filtered, and obviously it's been added colour. I mean, look at this. Bear in mind the price of this thing. Bear in mind that I've said it's probably about 3 years old. There's absolutely no way in hell that that's a natural colour to whiskey. But yeah, I actually don't know for sure. It's not on the livery. It's not on the website. It's whatever. So don't know for sure. But we're making a kind of snap assessment on that. So yeah, there's not really much else to say about, but I'm getting straight into the tasting, because that's going to be the proof of this, whether this is any good or not, or whether you guys are going to be interested. So yeah, again, don't really talk about the colour because I don't know much about it. Let's get onto the nose and see what we've got. Okay, so for me, actually, the nose isn't too bad. It's quite punchy, it's quite smoky, it's quite ashy. A little bit of those kind of TCP notes, those medicinal notes that we get from some distilleries. It also smells quite, dare I say, sweet and fruity. A little bit sweet and fruity, not in incredible amounts, but just enough to keep things interesting. Bit of honey, and some kind of floral, heathery notes going on there as well. Yeah, all in all, not a bad nose, I have to say. let's try on the palate and see what we got. Okay, so yeah, the initial mouthfeel at 100% is quite thin, quite watery. Like we talk about viscosity a lot sometimes, and it's about as sort of thin as you can get, really. That said, that disappears quite quickly into the kind of smokiness. So you are getting some smoke and some peat off of this, a bit more of those TCP vibes that I was talking about on the nose. If I'm being really, really kind, then I do get a little bit of those kind of like, you know, caramels and honeys and things like that. But what I'm saying, it's really like infinitesimally small. I have another quick sip. Yeah, you know, I mean, I'm getting some smoke, I'm getting some peat. It tastes like whiskey. The finish is, I mean, it's there. It's basically non-existent, but it is there. You know, I know that I'm drinking whiskey. Is probably the kindest thing I can say. That said, you know, talking about all the things, so it does taste of peat. It does taste of whiskey. It's not a good whiskey, but it isn't a terrible whiskey, and that's a really big differentiation, because very, very few whiskies in the world are terrible, in my opinion. Most are drinkable. Some are good, some are great, and some are mind-blowing. This is squarely in that kind of drinkable category. Now, for 13 quid, I think it's pretty good. I mean, you can do better, for sure. You know, where I am in my whiskey journey, and where you probably are as well if you're watching this, is that if you can afford sort of 13 quid for a whiskey, then you can probably afford £26 for a whiskey, double that, and get something that definitely is doubly as good. And we talk about that a lot as well, where let's say, for instance, you've spent 50 quid on a bottle of whiskey versus £100, is it twice as good? And it very rarely is. You know, if we're talking about return on investment for experience, not for selling on, but if you're talking about the amount of money you spend versus the experience you get while drinking it, the sort of curve tends to be a bit like this. So it goes up quite sharply and then teeters off, and then you get diminishing returns, I think, as you get more and more expensive. Yes, obviously it still keeps going up most of the time. There are exceptions to every rule, of course, but it mostly still keeps going up. So, you know, if you ever get to try a £3,000 bottle of whiskey, then it's probably going to be nice. Whether you'll taste a difference or not is entirely up to your own palate. But yeah, I'm sort of dancing around the issue a bit here. Personally, I didn't buy this. A friend gave it to me. However, I'm pretty happy with it at 13 quid. It's doing exactly what it says on the tin. You know, you've got peat, you've got whiskey. It's 40%. If you're the kind of person like me who changes their mood all the time, and you want to just try a whiskey one evening, and you don't really want to tap into your good stuff, you just want a dram of something, this pretty much fits that bill. I wouldn't be giving this to anyone. I wouldn't be serving it to anyone. If a friend came round and said they were looking to get into whiskey, to get into peat, if they just wanted a dram, I wouldn't even be reaching for this, because it would be probably a little bit embarrassing. I've got much better stuff that I can sort of show off if I really want to show off, or if I want to have someone a really good experience of drinking whiskey. This won't be getting served. This would be purely just a drinker's whiskey for drinking, getting it down your neck. Forget about the bottle. You wouldn't be replacing it. Straight in the recycling. Job's a good one. There you go. I think I've been quite diplomatic about it. I think for the vast majority of you, this is not going to be a worthy whiskey, but for anyone who's looking for a bargain, anyone who just wants a daily sipper, it's probably worth a shot. And in that case, you know, links in the description below. Might be an affiliate link if they've got any stock, but in any case, that's my review of this. I'm going to enjoy drinking the rest of that, just purely for the fact that it is what it is. Cheers. See you again on more No Nonsense Whiskey videos.